Now the Bible has been denigrated. Its credibility has been questioned and cross-questioned. You and I have heard things like the Bible has been changed, it's unreliable, the Bible is corrupted, and so forth. But many Christians have stood up to communicate and defend the credibility of the scriptures. And whilst others do it with felicity, there are those who still struggle. And so today I've got Dr. Daniel Wallace. Who is he and why can we believe him? So let's check some basic information about Dr. Daniel Wallace, or should I say Professor Daniel Wallace. So he's an American professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary. He's also the founder and executive director of the Center of Study of New Testament Manuscripts, the purpose of which is digitizing all known Greek manuscripts of the New Testament via digital photographs. Now, Professor Daniel Wallace provides a very liberating answer for those who defend the faith and love the scriptures. Let's check him out.
We don't have the original manuscripts of the New Testament. They all disappeared within a century, I'm pretty convinced, by copying and copying and copying. Frequent handling. The early church was far more concerned to get the gospel out than they were to do exact copying of the New Testament. And that actually is a blessing, because they didn't have those kinds of controls, and consequently you get copies that are not through just one stream, but tons of people all over the place are making these copies. So here's a man who lives in Corinth. He's going to be visiting Rome, and he says, hey, I heard Paul wrote a letter to you guys too. I want to write that out. Do you mind if I copy it when I get there? Sure, that's no problem. This happened, I'm sure, dozens and dozens of times over. And those manuscripts would have lasted as much as 80, 90 years, but would have fallen apart from all these copies being made. So we don't have the originals, they disappeared, and all the copies that we have disagree with each other at some point. Sometimes it's quite a few disagreements, but we have hundreds of thousands of textual variants among our manuscripts. So a question to ask here is, how badly did the scribes corrupt the New Testament? It's absolutely proven that they did. No two manuscripts are alike, so unless one of them is pristine, every single scribe made mistakes. So because the original manuscripts disappeared and because no two copies agree with each other completely, we have to do textual criticism. We can't just rely on one, it's imperfect. So scholars have to reconstruct it on that basis. But when you look at the number of textual variants, and there's hundreds of thousands of them, as Bart Ehrman likes to say, there are more textual variants than there are words in the original New Testament. That's actually an understatement. But you have to not just look at the number of variants, you have to look at the nature of these variants. And the best estimates are that at least 99.8% of them affect nothing. Most are spelling differences. There's different ways to spell John. There's different ways to spell Mary. They're not going to affect anything. But the 1/5 of 1% that do affect things are the ones that scholars talk about and disagree over on a number of these issues. But the bottom line is, it does not matter in some respects which New Testament you use, because no essential doctrine is jeopardized by any of these textual variants. Even Bart Ehrman, who wrote Misquoting Jesus, can say the same thing. So that's true on that end, but at the same time, we want to know what the original text said in all the details. And so the great majority of scholars have very few disagreements over these passages. For example, most scholars would say the long ending of Mark's Gospel, Mark 16, 9 through 20, is almost surely not authentic. And they still put in their Bibles, typically smaller print or in brackets or footnote. The oldest authorities don't have this. So there's a wide consensus on the vast majority of textual variants. And again, there's no essential doctrine that's jeopardized by any of these textual variants. That is extremely comforting. It's very important to know that.
Now, some Christians have been taught to ask the questions, when was the Bible changed and where was it changed? And this is done as a method of perhaps deflecting the opposer. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it does not work. That's because sometimes the opposer can be able to answer those questions very well. And then the discussion takes an embarrassing turn that wasn't really anticipated. Yep,
Hey, you can't
that's
park
a
there.
very slippery slope.
You can't park there.
Now, the Bible is very reliable. And the degree of error that is prevalent in the Bible does not at all jeopardize the authenticity and the credibility of the scriptures. In fact, as mentioned, the degree of error that is prevalent in the Bible is so infinitesimal and minuscule that it does not really affect the consistency that is in the Bible and with regards to all of the doctrines that are harmonious with each other.